Welcome to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, a podcast about geek culture by lawyers with your hosts, Ben Siders and Kirk Damon.
And welcome back to A Lawyer's Guide to the Galaxy, the podcast that asks interesting questions that don't have any answers with your hosts, Ben Siders, that's me, and the other guy is, as always, Kirk Damon.
That's Kirk, as the captain of the Enterprise.
We are certified geeks and intellectual property lawyers practicing law in St. Louis, Missouri. You can find me, Ben, on Twitter at Benjamin Siders, and Kirk is at KirkDMN. Kirk, Season 3, Episode 2. We have an unconventional recording studio set up today.
Yes, we are not in either of our recording studios today. We are not in our library location. We are not in our professional location. We are trying to do this on our phones to see if we can do live episodes.
Yeah, we're sort of hunched over chairs right now in a random office. We couldn't get our library studio set up today in our regular location. We're going to be circling back to sometime in the next couple of weeks to a month. But right now we're sort of improvising something to see if we can squeeze out some content here this week before Wednesday. And this is a big experiment for us. So we'll see how it sounds. And if you have any feedback or thoughts on that, let us know.
And definitely part of the purpose behind this, as I sort of mentioned in conjunction with it, is we have contemplated the idea of trying to do some live episodes, so we need to be able to see what we can take for mics on the road.
Yeah, definitely. So today we're going to do a little bit of a shorter format. We had actually sort of a schedule written up through basically June of what we wanted to do content-wise, but then for some reason my Evernote ate it, and I can't find what we had originally planned. So for today, we are going to switch things up a bit. We were going to rotate through a couple of different episode types, but since we don't have sort of our master outline, today we're going to do a abbreviated review of The Mandalorian first season, and then sort of preview some topics coming up in the next month or so.
So yeah, I think that's basically where we're going to go, talk through some basic stuff. But we have not yet talked about The Mandalorian, and that is something we probably should be talking about.
Yeah, so overall first impressions, Kirk, we were talking at lunch right before this that we both, I think, generally enjoyed watching it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed watching it.
Yeah. But I think the one thing that we both found a little off-putting, at least at first, was I didn't really grasp when I first started watching it that this was going to be sort of a throwback, like late 90s type syndicated sci-fi where you can just kind of plop in anywhere at episode 4 or 5 and just watch a self-contained episode that's going to mostly make sense on its own terms. It's not as serialized. It reminded me really of how Star Trek The Next Generation was made, where you've got a plot point at the start of each season, they come back to it at the end of the season, pick it up the next season, but in between there's just a lot of things that happen that don't really necessarily have any connection or bearing to the overall story.
I think that's a pretty accurate statement as to what it is. I think the comment we made, and again, sort of returning back to that conversation at lunch, is, well, it has that format. It seems to have a problem in the fact that it doesn't, contemplate the idea like the Star Trek Next Generation did of the captain's log at the start, and having this element which tells you, hey, this is the new episode, this is setting up what it is. You just kind of have the Mandalorian arriving someplace else.
Yeah, and I think that's just a consequence of the plot structure. So why don't we start at a high level and just talk about, first of all, for those of you who haven't seen it, we're probably going to get into spoilers here.
Oh, we're going to get into spoilers.
There's not a lot that really happens, so I don't know how much we're going to spoil. But if you haven't seen it, go see it. And we'll just assume that if you're listening that you've seen the first season, and so you kind of know what happens.
We've definitely got into elements of spoilers. I think we're going to have to, just because to explain the last episodes, which really do kind of tie up the season, we're going to tell you what happens.
So, Kirk, let's start with this. Let's do our rating scale. From a scale of 0 to 10 or 1 to 10, where would you put season 1, just in terms of overall entertainment value?
I'd probably put it like a solid 7, 7.5. I think it's a very solid, entertaining to watch show. Each episode is entertaining. It's enjoyable. It's fun, just generally in the idea that it explores parts of the Star Wars universe, gets into some things that have been sort of less explained and not really discussed in a lot of places. I think it also, as a show, it does a great job of sort of just being loosely entertaining. The interplay between the Mandalorian and the other characters, obviously some of the running characters, Baby Yoda, who we're going to get into in a bit, but even the temporary characters are people that are interesting. They're not necessarily just archetypes. They tend to have a little bit more depth to them, I think, than we're used to seeing for third-party characters.
Yeah, I think that's about right. And I'm in the same place. I'm at like a solid 7 or an 8. It was good. The production value is there. Generally well directed. Generally well acted. I like that it picked up on things that we've been told about in previous Star Wars entries, but haven't really gotten a chance to explore any detail yet. I like that it's in this period after Jedi, but before the First Order, which has been sort of exhaustively covered by books, but not really explored visually. It's an interesting part of the universe to get into. But I think what I like the most about it is that the focus of the story was really, really tightened up. Rather than having to have some big grand epic, there was no stupid like random Luke Skywalker encounter, or he flies in somewhere and, oh, hey, look, there's a Millennium Falcon doing something. It was, they got rid of all of that stuff and kind of ditched all of the baggage of the originals and let this story be smaller, tighter, more focused, and to kind of go in its own direction without having to, pay homage to what's come before, which, eliminates the need for the fan service. And we talked, one of the things I thought they did exceptionally well is when you focus a story in like that, you can make one AT-ST look like an incredibly menacing threat. You can make one TIE fighter just be like the bad guy you have to beat at the end, whereas in the saga movies, one TIE fighter is just, it's cannon fodder. It's nothing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that it really did well is it gives you the idea of this being a small unit action, and really the way, in some, for lack of a better term, sort of the common person would have seen the Empire. I mean, I really love it. I think probably the best episode, my favorite episode definitely of the season, is the one with the AT-ST in it. And the fact that, the AT-ST is this, almost demonic monster in the way it's presented to the natives of that planet. I mean, one, it's painted up to look that way. They're playing it up, but the fact that it's this almost unstoppable thing. And you think about it, this thing's the equivalent of like a super heavy tank, and you've got guys with pitchforks. It's one of those where it's a great example of, I think, the sheer scale and power of the Empire. Even with the Empire being gone, you get the idea that, like, hey, just one leftover war machine from this is a complete game changer. And I think that's a real valuable sort of piece behind it, is the fact that you get the fact that the Empire is really, really strong and powerful. Quite frankly, it makes the Death Star more menacing.
It does. It puts sort of a bottom end of the scale cap on it, and makes these things that you sort of, there's a tendency in serial storytelling to always escalate, right? So Iron Man 1 has, War Machine. No, not War Machine. Who's the bad guy in Iron Man 1?
Who's the bad guy in War Machine 1?
Jeff Daniels.
Yeah. Can't be who it is. War Machine's 2.
Yeah, and then, then the bad guy in 2 has to be even bigger, and in 3 even bigger. And then we saw this even with the Star Wars movies. 7 has to have an even bigger Death Star to blow up. And then 9 has to have 1,000,000 Death Stars to blow up.
We have a whole fleet of Death Stars.
There's this multiplication effect where, the stakes have to be even higher and the threat has to be even more serious than the last thing. Or we feel like we've been cheated somehow. Like, well, this wasn't as good as the last one because they didn't overcome as much. But it's all just manufactured in the writing, so it doesn't really matter, right? We know they're going to overcome it because it's a Star Wars movie. So for this one to scale the stakes down and go the other direction, and to do it largely successfully, I think is remarkable.
Yeah, I think it did a really, really good job of scaling the things down. I mean, even the Mandalorian ship, you get the impression like this thing's utilitarian. This is not a fighter aircraft. This is something which is designed to transport in between locations.
It looked like the old ships from the prequels.
Yeah. And it definitely has like feel of it. You notice some things in it sort of, and that was one of the things I also think they did really well, is they tied certain elements of the prequels into it. I mean, when you see his origin story and the idea of him being rescued, he's being rescued from droids.
The destroyer droids, yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of get into the whole, who's he being rescued from? I mean, the droids are the Trade Alliance, but who's that mean he's actually being rescued from? We're pre-Empire at this point in time. Where does the Mandalorian sort of fit into this? Again, I like that sort of componentry of it, of the fact that they do that with it. And to me, it just makes better story, because we're now telling the story of the Mandalorian and of Baby Yoda. And, it allows it to be that, like, him being in peril alone is important. The example I think of right in the beginning is conjunction with the dealing with the Jawas and having to go get the egg. We get the idea that, like, okay, he's fighting a rather nasty monster that he's having to deal with, and it's not
the Mudhorn. You mean?
The Mudhorn, yeah. And it's something where this is not an easy task. This is an individual task that he needs to go do. But it's something which is also, it's scary. The Jawas can't do it. We even get the idea of like a Jawa sandcrawler being a relatively, major component of this. That's a city. And it is. That's what I really liked about it.
Star Wars version of a cruise ship.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, except it crawls on land and it's full of junk droids. But,
well, so we also talked before. What are some of the things that you did not like as much?
So definitely, a few of the things I thought were sort of poor, along with the idea of the more serialized format and the idea that does it. I really think they did a poor job of introducing each new story. I think we were kind of expecting to go out and see, hey, this is going to follow on, and it doesn't. There's no connection, but there's also no explanation of like, why is he here? Why is he come to this planet? What is he looking for? What is going on? He kind of lacks motivation through, I think, most of the first season in conjunction with it, because it's okay. He has Baby Yoda. He's obviously on the run from the guild, which is introduced relatively early. Why is he going here? Why is he going there? A couple places it's like, oh, he's going there because he's trying to get money. So the one where he meets up with one of his old, people involved with him, and he's doing that because of the fact that he needs to make some money and he thinks he can get a job out of this, which is safe.
Is that the one where they did the heist on the prison ship?
They had the heist. They had the other bounty hunter. Yeah, the heist was the one particularly. But yeah, the other one.
That one was also
hunter.
interesting because you saw a little bit of the New Republic as being the new government, and like a couple of X-wings came in, and once again, just a couple of X-wings. He hightails it out of there. He can't go toe to toe with an X-wing.
Yeah, well, again,
and doesn't even try.
You're thinking of the idea of taking an infantryman versus an F-15. It's obvious who's going to win this, and I think that's there. Even more actually, maybe an A-10 because it's a ground attack aircraft. But yeah, it's one of those where, again, I think they kind of lacked motivation in doing some of this stuff between each individual episode. Okay, I get the idea that like he's hiding. Why is he hiding here? Yeah. Why has he come to this location? There must be some reason for this. It's not just some backwater planet.
Well, you hinted at this in our Rise of Skywalker preview that there's some timing issues with how this story unfolds, and I think that's right. And we, this differs from a syndicated show where they kind of know that they're going to have to reorient the audience every time in each new episode. So Star Trek, they always had the voiceover where Picard says Stardate, whatever, and then he can just say, we spent the last 4 months doing blah, blah, blah. So coming into the episode, regardless of whether you watched the prior one or not, 4 months has gone by since the last one. You don't really have to have watched it to follow the current episode. But this one, they kind of know it's going to be released in a serial format. It's not syndicated, and there is an overarching story. So they didn't provide that sort of overview, and the timing, they couldn't. Like you can't just have a 2-month gap between when he leaves the last planet and goes to the next one. But you still kind of lack that orientation in the story, and I think they try to do a little bit of both a serialized and a syndicated approach to it, and didn't really successfully pull off either one. It's good enough, but neither one worked as well as it could have if they'd really leaned either way.
Definitely the thing that I noticed in conjunction with the timing is not even so much the timing between episodes, but some of the timing within episodes. And again, I'm going to pick on the ATST episode. I think was a great example. We have him arrive on this planet. We get the fact that, okay, these guys are being attacked. These, native farmers are being attacked by raiders. They're going to be trained to fight the raiders. We don't know how long that training takes, but it seems to take very little time.
It plays out very briefly unseen. And I've made the comment before, I think it's because this story is plotted for 12-year-olds.
Yeah. And
so they don't want to have, a 2 or 3 minute montage scene that the kids are going to check out on. So there's just a couple of short, Seven Samurai type scenes, and then we move on.
Yeah, and I think that it harmed the timing because you didn't know how long they were training. But then in particular, the one that I really noted is they defeat the raiders, and then you have him sort of sitting, being comfortable in conjunction with it when you have the other bounty hunter showing up to try to capture him.
And that timing is poorly laid out too. It seemed like it happened like 3 hours later, but that's not like we're then later told he's been there for like a month.
Yeah, it's almost later in the same day in the way it's sort of laid out. But definitely when you see what's going on, it's not the same day. It's potentially weeks, months later. I really thought that would have been something where it would have been nice to have had. And again, you could have done it with a lot of times with throwaway lines. Hey, we've been here for 4 months, and we've had scene 3 of these because they comment about the example of what I use is like the scene from in conjunction with the beginning of Empire Strikes Back with Han Solo, where it's the, hey, you know, I was comfortable being with the rebellion, but, you know, those bounty hunters I bumped into have got me worried at this point in time. You're like, okay, time has passed here. Like a substantial amount of time has passed between these two movies. But at the same time, old debts are still being repaid and stuff like that. And I really thought they could have done much more with that, of just, again, throwaway lines that would have given us much more of an understanding of how long has this been? How long is this taking us? Where are we going with it? Things like that. And particularly, and I pick on that episode in particular because I think that episode is one of the few.
It really stuck out in that one.
Yeah, and because it's one of the few where it looks like he's supposed to be on the planet for a while. A lot of times he's running away right at the end. You know, he's trying to get away, you know, with himself and Baby Yoda intact, and making sure that he just doesn't have, you know, anybody on his tail. That how quick can he get away? Again, sort of the other thing I think is sort of bump into with the timing issues is the logistics issues. You know, he is flying a spacecraft. That spacecraft needs fuel.
We had to stop on Tatooine, which I did not. We'll get into that, but I did not like the stop on Tatooine.
See, I actually enjoyed the stop on Tatooine episode, but I enjoyed it because I enjoyed the presentation of Tatooine, and I thought there was some potential really interesting, subtle pieces to it. So, like the example of it is he walks clearly into the same bar that
the bartender is now a droid.
But the bartender is now a droid, whereas previously droids were not allowed in that bar, and I think that's a sort of really kind of thing. Is like Tatooine has changed. We have seen the changed world. The idea that sort of this is the Republic, but also the bar is pretty empty. Like it was very crowded when Ben and Luke go into it, but at this point in time, it's relatively empty. There's only a couple. I think him and the person he meets up with, and maybe one or two other people in the entire bar. And I think that's a really good presentation of the idea of just how things have changed. And so, to me, that episode was obviously a bit of fan service, just sort of showing that bar again. But it was really cool to see the idea that, like, no, we're in a different world. This is not the world we're used to from Star Wars. It's a different world.
I think one of the reasons these episodes have the internal pacing problems is that there's such a small cast, and we're not taking the cast with us. Like, unlike a Star Trek where all the characters are on the ship, they're all going to the same place together. We have the Mandalorian, we have the Baby Yoda, and then the other characters kind of change from episode to episode. And when you don't have a bigger cast like that, you don't have a B plot that you can run through or a C plot. And usually cutting away to the B plot or the C plot is one of the ways that you can convey to the audience the passage of time. So you cut away, to the other characters doing something else that takes some time. Then when you cut back, you have a throwaway line about like, well, we've been training them for 3 weeks now and they're not getting it. So you can convey things that way. This episode or this series doesn't have that luxury based on how the story is written. So I don't know if that's something they can fix going forward. Maybe they will. But I think that's maybe structurally why the pacing seems so awkward, is there's no other plot to cut away to and then come back.
It's the real problem, and I think the big thing you get into is that this is one person's story. It's just the Mandalorian story. You've got Baby Yoda along, but Baby Yoda is non-vocal. Obviously not somebody that the Mandalorian is going to be interacting with directly, other than a few sort of childish encounters.
Yeah, saying stop all the time when he tries to play with that knob.
Yeah, he tries to steal the knob and everything else. The thing that I think you really bump into in conjunction with what are we doing with the Mandalorian and the storyline is because it's a one-person show, all of his relationships seem superficial. And it's the one thing I really had trouble with in the end is when they came into the end and it's, we're going to bring back all these people that we've encountered throughout the entire first season. It's going to become a team. Great. I'm like, this is going to become our team. Maybe one or two of these people is going to get killed in conjunction with it, but we have a team going forward. And these are going to become the new Mandalorian team and the people who are trying to protect Baby Yoda. Then you have, multiples of them, die in conjunction with it in ways they're not coming back from. Yes. Then you have at the very end, we're just walking away. This is over. Well, at the same time, we kind of leave the fact that, hey, the villain's still out there. But to me, just that presents a problem in the fact that it's like, but I liked those characters. I would like to see some more of them. It was great that you brought them back, but then it's almost like, hey, you brought them back. This is great. They're going to be here. And now suddenly they're not again. But I also am kind of left with that. Are we going to see them again? Is this going to come later on? And is that going to be worth it? Is it going to be good? What are they going to be? Like one of the ones I really wondered about is, the woman's obviously expressed the fact that she's a deserter. She presumably has bounties on her head. That was her concern in conjunction with meeting the Mandalorian in the first place. Is she going to come back as somebody the Mandalorian is now chasing, or somebody that he's chasing somebody who's chasing? And are we going to see that? Is it going to be something with it? Is that going to become a season 2 cliffhanger? I don't really mind that as a plot point, but at the same time, I kind of worry if it's going to go there, where else is it going to go in conjunction with these things, instead of it just being, hey, she's part of it. You can easily have the exact same plot of a bounty hunter coming after her while having her be part of the team. So again, I think my thing with it isn't kind of your comment to the Enterprise. The Enterprise had a crew. We had the entire bridge crew plus a few others.
You have an away team, you have a bridge crew, you can have an engineering problem. Like, there's a lot of ways to split up the cast and give everybody something to do.
Yeah, and you can always have, the throwaway character that you need. Hey, I mean, we need somebody to get shot. Where's the red shirts? But I think that, this has just got a problem that it's because it's one person's journey. It's one man's journey. Is going to be very difficult for them to figure out how do we bring other characters in this that have any kind of lasting impact to the character without them potentially either looking throwaway or being throwaway and not looking throwaway. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see where does that go. And again, I think a lot of it's also going to be, now that they've seen how successful season 1 was, it may give them some ideas of what do we want to do in season 2.
Do they expand this and kind of tell it in a different way, or do they stick with this format? I think is an interesting question. Another thing I really liked, just conceptually, imagine you're trying to pitch to a TV studio. We're going to have a show where the main character wears a helmet for the entire episode, and that's a key part of the character, and you only actually see his face and his emotions for about 30 seconds of the entire first season. How receptive do you think the average producer is going to be to that kind of structure? Oh, and the next most important character is a CGI baby that doesn't talk.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and from what I understand, actually, with the conjunction with Baby Yoda, they filmed all of the scenes for Baby Yoda twice, one with essentially a Muppet and one with CGI, because they were worried as to how exactly would it look. And I think most of the time they're actually using the Muppet equivalent.
Oh, okay.
In conjunction. I may be wrong about that. That's stuff I've read in third-party press. But definitely I think the thing you've got in conjunction with Baby Yoda, it's amazed me at how popular Baby Yoda is. And again, we're calling Baby Yoda, that's sort of the accepted name in conjunction with
the child,
what's out there.
Although
it's technically the child. If you go to what they call him, all the toys that are official are calling it the child. The episode is called The Child, at which point in time it's introduced. Does not have a name, purposely does not have a name. I assume they've shied away from Baby Yoda because it's probably not supposed to directly be Baby Yoda.
Or if it is, we're not supposed to know that. Yeah.
And so we'll see where that's going in conjunction with it. But what I definitely liked about it is that gives some vulnerability to the character. It gives him a very clear weakness in the fact that he has to essentially babysit this. He needs to keep it safe. You're given that express command at the end of, hey, this is your task to keep this youngling safe. That's a nice piece of it to just sort of say, hey, he's got to do something. You now know what it is. I mean, you can present peril immediately by simply presenting Baby Yoda as in peril for any reason. And I think that's got a lot they can work with. Again, what I worry about with it is he has no other crew. And so it's Baby Yoda's got to be in peril. He's got to be in peril, or we've got to kind of manufacture someplace for him to go and have peril.
Yeah. One of the other things I did not care for so much are some of the throwaway fan servicey things. And I'm not sure if it was even fan service or just like not being thoughtful about it. But we see Empire Strikes Back. They have the Tabana gas mine at Bespin has this giant, elaborate carbon freezing chamber. I mean, it's enormous, right? You can fit 25 characters into it to freeze this gas for transport. And so they test it on Han Solo to make sure it's not going to kill anybody because they don't know if it's going to actually work or not.
And because they have to find a safe way to transport Luke.
To transport Luke.
Vader comes up with this.
Yeah, he comes up with this idea. So they're gonna use this chamber to freeze Luke, and they test it on Han, and fine, it works. And then now it's miniaturized and placed on the guy's ship, and he has just a bunch of people in carbonite literally hanging in like a closet. I that was a little jarring to me. I just thought they've miniaturized this technology where it fits on a ship now. It doesn't make any sense. That's not what it's for.
To me, it makes sense in the idea that he has a small ship. How else would you carry bounties? He can't go do one at a time. He's got to go do multiples. So it fit the requirement of that, but at the same time, it doesn't fit the technology. And I think that's exactly what we're causing the problem.
It's there because we know that bounty hunters freeze people and put them in carbonite because we all saw Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah, except for the fact that that's not what they did.
It's not really, it kind of ignores the context of it. And it's sort of like, oh, this is a thing you've seen before. Here, see it again.
Yeah, I think that was in my mind, that is the real glaring problem in conjunction with it, and they haven't needed it. It's been something where it's just at the beginning, hey, this is what we're doing. He has not needed it. He's not captured any bounties.
And it never came back. He's never put anybody else in carbonite. I bet that happens at some point.
Yeah, it may happen
sort of like though Star Trek, the saucer section can separate. We saw that in the first episode, and then never again for like 4 seasons.
Yeah, there's a few things along those lines that definitely, things that like the Enterprise could do that didn't become important until later, and sort of things like that. The thing that I think they did a really great job in doing was setting up the concept of the bounties, like the puck, which they reused repeatedly during the course of it.
That's the thing, like the new stuff they introduced, the new ideas, the new concepts, all worked really well, I thought. It was sort of the clumsy recycling of what we've seen before that fell a little flat for me.
The only one I thought really worked, quite frankly, as fan service, and I thought I actually enjoyed and I got a kick out of, was the crumb reference at the beginning, with the idea of him being a food component being sold in the local bazaar. There's one being roasted,
right.
There's another one watching from the cage, and the idea
that's that little guy that was in Jabba's palace, right? Salacious Crumb, or whatever his name was. Yeah.
And I think that I liked that as fan service, and the idea that, like, hey, these creatures are common, they're all over the place, and they're pets, they're food, they're nothing special, and the idea that the fact that Jabba had one just makes it a pet. I kind of liked that idea. It's just, again, a sort of throwaway type thing that I think they did a good job with. I actually, and it was one of those, I know we talked about it a little bit, I liked the fact that it was Jawas, and the idea that Jawas are sort of ubiquitous. They're kind of like, just everywhere in society, that they're someplace because they're scavengers.
Yeah.
To me, it makes sense as to what they are, just as a racially type designed alien.
See, I always thought they were just in Tatooine, and they had a sandcrawler, because Tatooine was a desert planet. And the Jawas being there, I thought was a little strange. I mean, it worked well enough, but the sandcrawler part didn't make any sense to me. Yeah. We were told that this planet has all these crevices, so you have to use the blorg, whatever it's called.
Little bounding horses,
to run around and get around. Yet they've got this giant sandcrawler that presumably can't jump. I mean, unless it's got hydraulics or something. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah, it can lower itself and raise itself, just depending on what this quality of the ground is coming over.
So that stuck out to me too as one of those things that were, rather and there's an information efficiency though. Like, we know what a Jawa is. So rather than giving us a new species and new costumes and something new to design, and then having to introduce it and explain the backstory, we've already got something that serves that role functionally in the Star Wars universe. So there is some sense to just recycling that. It may not be the most artistic way to go about it, but art is not the only consideration in making these things. There's also budget.
Quite frankly, one of the things I liked about the fact that they were used the Jawas is we didn't have a race introduced solely to make toys out of or something along those lines. Yeah. We have existing races coming into play, existing equipment coming into play. Again, the idea that the Empire is gone, but there's bits of it around. I mean, this was a huge military organization which, completely dominated the known universe. The fact that Raiders have managed to get their hands on an AT-ST is not at all surprising. It's something where, hey, they found it, they were able to get it functioning again. Maybe it did function. How they got our hands on it, we don't know. We don't care.
It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, but the fact is that it's this devastating piece of war machinery now in the sort of private hands, and there is no Empire to stop it. There is no, the Republic coming out of the rebellion is not in any position to stop it. It's too small scale. Again, you send one X-Wing, you can blow it up, but why would they be going to this planet? That there's no problem here. It's just Raiders. And so I think that was some of the things that was really well set up as that type of idea. The other thing I really liked about it, and just want to talk about it, is I really loved the Ugnaught. I loved the fact that he was a character. I thought he was a great character. Very sad to see him die,
Voiced by Nick Nolte, was it?
It might have been, yeah. And the thing that I really had from it, I mean, I love the way they did, the sort of unique way he talked and everything along those lines. I've spoken. But I also really liked the idea of him being the, no, we were essentially this, essentially slave race to the Empire. I didn't want to be part of that. I'm on my own now. And this giving him a very strong moral code, which doesn't necessarily fit with the Mandalorian, doesn't necessarily fit with anybody else in the universe, but by which he lives by very strongly. Him rebuilding the droid, the idea that, no, this is wasted parts. You do not waste parts. I will take this assassin droid and turn it into a nursemaid. I mean, those kind of things as to what it is. I really thought he was a cool character, and I thought it was very sad to see him go. I also really liked the interaction between him and the other characters, because he was Empire, but he was not Empire by choice. And, the interaction between him and the rebellion drop trooper, I thought went very, very well. I just thought it was some of those things where it's these two do not trust each other, and they have good reason not to trust each other.
And the Ugnaught provided the sort of moral center for the story. Like, somebody has to be the older, wiser advisor that doesn't really have a direct stake, but can kind of sit back and dispense advice and give the main character somebody to talk to so he can have some character development.
Yeah.
And he provided that really well.
He definitely was kind of the mentor figure. And definitely, I mean, the Mandalorian needed a mentor figure when this started. I think you had the idea that he was... One of the questions I had with it is, you get the impression, how long has he been a Mandalorian? And you get the impression not that long, at least not as a Mandalorian bounty hunter, at least not sort of doing what he's doing. There's a lot of discussion of the fact that he's the best bounty hunter that's out there and things along those lines. But, his armor is very incomplete. He gets a lot of components of his armor near the end. At the same time, it's clearly he has some of it. And so the idea of, he's been at this for a while, but he may still be a little bit junior. That was the other thing I liked about the Tatooine episode. episode. I liked the idea of there being another bounty hunter, him kind of being a mentor figure to that bounty hunter. I thought, unfortunately, that the motivations that led to a lot of what happened in that episode didn't make sense.
A little clumsy.
Yeah, it was
the writing was a little clumsy.
And the ending of it, to my mind, just made no sense. The idea of I can get a greater bounty on him, so let me kill this bounty. Well, why don't you take her? Isn't she acceptable dead? Most of these bounties, I think, are dead or alive. At least, maybe it's a reduced amount, but why don't you just keep the body? And at the same time, if she's so dangerous, why on earth did the Mandalorian leave her with him? Why didn't they just shoot her and take her with them? In my mind, it's the kind of thing where, and a little bit of this may be coming from the idea of Han shot first, quite frankly.
Yep.
The Star Wars universe has to be a bit brutal, and it works a little better when it's a bit brutal. I mean, it's the reason why I've always had trouble with the fact of them removing that scene is not because of the fact that I think it was just an original scene or whatever it is, but it sets up Han's personality. You are in an Old West backwater saloon. People die in the saloon, and the extent of what happens is them throwing a few credits to clean it up. I really like the idea of that. That's just sort of how brutal that place is. This is a backwater world. Yeah. And to have that kind of come out of the Mandalorian of this, hey, he's a bounty hunter. He's a ruthless bounty hunter. He sees completely through the initial catch right at the beginning, the sort of lickfish man that we encounter at the beginning. And yet he doesn't see completely through this skilled assassin. And again, it's why on earth would you take this person in alive, given what they are? And it almost would have worked better, I think, had they have been dead, other than the fact that you need her to turn the other bounty hunter, but I'm not sure you needed that. Again, I think he could have figured that out enough on his own, as to say, hey, I'm going to turn on my erstwhile ally and everything else. So again, there were parts of the Tatooine episode I really loved. There were part of the Tatooine episode I really hated, and that was kind of the really hated. To me, again, the plot just didn't quite stick, even though I thought individual scenes were very cool, and a lot of the sort of nature of the universe now, that it isn't quite so brutal of a place, did a great job.
So other than the first and last episode, what was your favorite one?
I think definitely without any question, it's the ATSTS episode. And the reason I really love that episode, one, you have the presentation of the Mandalorian as being, for lack of a better term, human. In conjunction with it, the idea that, hey, he's interested in settling down. He doesn't necessarily like this life, but it's part of him. It's what he has to be. The interaction, I think the woman who played the drop trooper was definitely besides the Ugnaught, sort of the most interesting character he encountered. I still think she's one of the most interesting characters, and definitely one of the most left alive. I really would like to see her come back because I think her character is really interesting. And the idea that, she's a rebellion trooper, now a Republic trooper that's deserted because of what she's being asked to do, which sounds a lot like Stormtrooper-esque. Mm-hmm. And I really like that idea that they're sort of saying, like, hey, any government here may be dangerous. That's why there's a rebellion. That's why we have these kind of things going on. So I really liked her. I also, and quite frankly, the best part of the episode is the ATST presented as this just beast demon thing. Its eyes are glowing red. It's painted in war paint. But it's a single unit. It's a single sort of great thing that these raiders have, and how much of that is built around this. I mean, they are raiders because of this thing. That's what makes them successful. The farmers fear it because they don't understand it. They don't know what it is. And it's this leftover piece of technology that's out there, which the Mandalorian knows what it is, and he knows how to fight it. He knows how to destroy it. And at the same time, you get like the operator where it's hey, I'm not going to step forward. I know not to do this, but yet he can be provoked because you've got characters that actually know how the war works, that are used to fighting these things. Again, it'd be the equivalent of saying, I'm going to take a farmer with a pitchfork and face them off against a M1 Abrams is entirely different than if I'm going to face the same M1 Abrams with a skilled infantryman who's been trained in anti-tank training. It's a totally different play, and I think that really worked.
So, prognostication. Who is Baby Yoda?
Who is Baby Yoda?
Well, and maybe more interestingly, are we going to find an entire planet full of Yoda things? Or is Yoda sort of unique?
I think the idea is definitely Yoda's supposed to be unique. I have the feeling that we're going to find... I don't think he's going to be connected to Yoda. I think he's going to be another one of the race, but I'm not sure he's going to be necessarily directly connected to Yoda. He may be tangentially connected to Yoda. I just don't think that he's going to be directly connected to it. I think the idea is going to be that these things are rare, that, it's essentially a dead race or dying race. he shouldn't exist, is sort of the way I kind of looked at it. What I worry about is, are we going to go to the midichlorians created him? And I don't think we're going to go there. I think we know enough not to go there. But I could definitely see that being something where they could take it. But what I'd like to see in conjunction with it is that he's not necessarily directed to anything directed to the trilogy. We just know he's powerful Force user because of his race, because this is what he is.
The one thing I found very confusing about all of this is, in the prequels, we are told that Yoda is the head of the Jedi Council. And Yoda also winds up being the main general in charge of fighting the Clone War.
Yeah.
So you would think he would be one of the most famous people in the galaxy. And the fact that we have Jedi Knights and that they have these powers should be well known, right? Because there's Jedis fighting all these battles on all these planets, and we all lived through the Clone War. And then, that seems to have been forgotten over the course of not even 20 years.
Yeah.
In the sequel or in the original trilogy, and then we get to the sequels, and again nobody believes in any of this. But then the Mandalorian, they don't recognize that the child is a Yoda.
Yeah.
It's kind of like Yoda, the guy that used to run the entire galaxy,
or even that Yoda has a race that again we don't know what his.
They don't know
race
what the
is.
Force is. I mean, even the guys in the Imperial Senate, they all knew about Jedis and religion and that kind of stuff. They thought it was a bunch of nonsense, and it was sort of dying off. But.
Yeah. It kind of goes back to the Star Wars, in some respects, the specific Star Wars beginning with the, ancient religions, stuff like that, Han's comment of we don't believe about it. And then you kind of get that as well in Episode 7, the idea of, it's nobody believes in this. My take of it was, it's always been my sort of explanation, quite frankly, for a lot of these things in conjunction with it, is it's a big universe. And so the idea is even the Clone Wars didn't necessarily affect everybody. We're not talking, the Clone Wars is the equivalent of World War II, which affects, every sort of, person on a planet or person in the universe.
On a galactic scale, it's the Falkland Islands,
Yeah. And so there's a lot of people that, would rapidly forget about it or wouldn't necessarily know what's going on.
Or it just didn't affect their lives that much.
Yeah. And quite frankly, there aren't that many Jedi. I mean, if you look at the idea of the Jedi Council, you take, the end of, Episode 2, there's not that many Jedi. They're still relatively common. You can believe them being written off as simply being a legend, being something as to whatever it is. Yes, we've heard about this.
Dozens or hundreds, maybe, we're led to believe.
Yeah.
Although we see classes of incoming children, and there's 20 people just in the class. Maybe they don't all make it.
Of course, you have to assume some don't make it, some may die, stuff like that.
Some are just the producers' kids who wanted to roll in the movie. Yeah. Then this is where Episode 8, although I thought it was well done as a story and a standalone film, its approach to the material kind of screws up the storyline, because now we're told, being a Jedi is nothing special. Everybody has the Force, or anybody could have the Force.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with it. I like the ideas, in some sense, there's superstition surrounding the Jedi. Mm-hmm. The idea that, hey, this is known as to what it is. I mean, as bad as this is, I kind of like the idea of Star Wars being a little bit more of a backward universe. Yeah. I mean, remember, it's a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So the idea is we have almost sort of, mystical nights and things like that, where we can have errors of communication. We can have technology where they don't really communicate. I mean, they've talked about this even in conjunction with the expanded universe. We've got the outer rim. We've got these sort of components of the galaxy where there's just no understanding of what it is. I mean, in some sense, that's what Tatooine was.
And it kind of lets you tell a story there and give it some room to breathe. And maybe this is where the sequels also kind of got off track, is you had to go back and revisit these characters and follow up with them. And then it's kind of hard to tell a new story from there, because you're always dragging the anchor of everything we already know. And The Mandalorian had a little more discretion to get away from that, and they did for the most part. We've got the Baby Yoda thing, but like you said, he's not really connected or tethered to anything we know yet. So it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. But hopefully they lean into that part of the story and really explore more of that part of the Star Wars universe and give us some interesting, cool new stuff without having to constantly go back and recycle the same things.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me in conjunction with this, and the thing I would most like to see in conjunction with The Mandalorian, is seeing some of the connection. I mean, one of my favorite scenes in it is when you first encounter the Empire First Order leader coming after the group, coming after Baby Yoda. You get the transition. This is a transition general. We are coming out of the Empire. I mean, you see him have essentially First Order troopers that he's working with, and he guns down the stormtroopers of the idea, hey, this is the creation of this new world order. This is coming into play. But he has a TIE fighter. He just has a standard TIE fighter, doesn't even have a flex-wing TIE fighter. But that's also very modern compared to a lot of what we've seen. We've seen X-Wings and things like that. But that was the thing that I really liked about that episode, quite frankly, is I liked the idea that, hey, this is going to be a transition. One of the biggest problems, I think, in conjunction with the sequels is where the heck did the First Order come from? Where did
Apparently
they
it's covered in some of the secondary materials, but we're told Palpatine was doing it all this time. But I don't know. It's lazy. It's lazy and lame.
Yeah, it works better, I think, with the idea of they have it. What again, I also think, and I've seen definitely some of the side press talking about the sequels and stuff like that. One of the big discussions in them is the fact that, hey, the movie's a standalone movie. It doesn't really need to be canon. Canon is kind of a dumb idea in many respects. The point is it a good movie? Do we enjoy it? But you can't really avoid those things. What I do like the fact that they're doing in The Mandalorian is kind of saying we can't avoid all those things. We can just tell a sub-story about something that isn't really that important here.
All right, well, we're going to wrap this one up. So we have, we're going to be back recording regular episodes in a couple days. I think Thursday we're going to go record.
That sounds right, yeah.
And then I've got a vacation. I'll be out of the country in a couple weeks. So we may have a rewind episode in there. But we're going to try and get regular content out to you that is more professionally produced. We'll be back to Cool Fire, our normal place. They have, we were just talking the other day, they have the best sound quality by far. Much better than my iPhone. And even the library's facilities, which are nice, are tough. It's tough to beat what they've got. So we'll be back there and rolling out new content to you over the course of the year, and we're really looking forward to it.
I think the thing we've really get into with this, and again, we mentioned it right at the beginning, and it's worth noting, part of the reason we're doing this, we are experimenting with different formats. Even the library was a different format. The real goal behind this is to recognize the fact that, we know a lot of podcasts are put on using, phone technology, using basic microphones, things like that. We've talked about the idea of wanting to potentially do live episodes, do episodes of things like when we are at IP law conferences, something along those lines, where we can meet up and have a guest on that we may not be able to have otherwise.
Or just when big cases come down that are relevant to what we want to talk about. We want to be able to sit down and record. So this is sort of an attempt to record low stakes content quickly and to see what we can do.
And that was part of the reason for doing this as sort of a low stakes episode. I mean, hey, we're only going to talk about The Mandalorian. It's not like we're going to get into anything in detail here.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, I also don't have my call sheet, so I can't read us out. So we're just going to wrap this episode up. Lorem is around here somewhere, and he will, as always, play us out.
Views expressed by the participants of this program are their own and do not represent the views of, nor are they endorsed by Lewis Rice LLC, its officers, directors, employees, agents, representatives, shareholders, and subsidiaries. None of the content should be considered legal advice. As always, consult a lawyer. This podcast was produced and recorded in St. Louis, Missouri.